This is Black Tower Radio. I am your host, Jake Fox. We are broadcasting on World News Radio .today. That's World News Radio .today. We are also broadcasting on 1040 AM, 92.1 FM, WYSL in Rochester, New York, and we are joined here by a very special guest, someone that I've been meaning to get on the show for quite some time now, but things happen, but we finally got him on now. It's Jerry Hollingsworth. We're going to dive into the Federal Reserve Bank. He's the author. He's a Pulitzer Prize nominated writer. He's the author of The Federal Reserve Bank Unaudited, a story based on true facts by Jerry Hollingsworth. Welcome to the show, Jerry.
Thank you very much, Jake. I appreciate you letting me come on.
All right, so why don't we get into who founded the Federal Reserve, who it's owned by, who are the member banks or the member families, and why were they so secretive when they started this whole thing on Jekyll Island?
Well, you have to understand what the mindset of the country was. In the early 1900s, you had a situation where just during President Teddy Roosevelt's presidency and President Taft's presidency, that they busted up over 215 monopolies during that period of time, and there was a concerted effort by a numerous number of wealthy families that to get all you can get any way you could get it, and that was kind of the mindset at that time. So monopolies and conspiracies was a regular thing back then. Today it's a little bit more reserved, but a little bit more secretive, but we had gotten to a point in this country where these groups of I call them elitist families, the Rockefellers primarily headed those groups, but they were constantly trying to corner a particular market, whether it be copper or any asset that they could monopolize. And because of that, we were having bank failures and economic depressions, panics, about an average of every 8 to 12, 13 years. So what they decided to do was to set up a monetary commission and allow the government to come up with something that would be universal, something that would be good for the citizens, something that would take the power out of the hands of these elitist families. Now, obviously, this didn't sit very well with the elitist families, and they had to do some work on their own. So they basically got together. The two primary families was the Rothschild family out of London and the Rockefellers out of New York. And they basically, at that time, had already controlled and taken control of two of the major banks. We now know one of them is Citigroup and the other one as J.P. Morgan Chase. And they sent their top employees down to a private island, as you said, Jekyll Island. And the reason that they had to keep secret about this is they could have met anywhere in New York. They could have been met in Boston. They could have met in Philadelphia. They own business interests, mega enterprises. They could have met anywhere. But it was so sensitive at that time because the government was working one side of the aisle trying to come up with a plan, and they had to work their end of it in a secret cartel fashion. And anyone that would see these people together at any given time as a group would know at this particular time that they were working on trying to figure out some way to monopolize our money industry. So that was the reason they took a 1,000-mile trip down to Jekyll Island. And the outcome of that meeting, and I want to go back and reemphasize one thing. These were employees of the Rockefeller Bank and the J.P. Morgan Bank. Absent their instructions from their employees, they would have no need to go to a secret meeting. They could meet anywhere in New York or Boston or anywhere. But when you're trying to captivate through a cartel or secret meeting that to control an industry as vast and as lucrative as our money system, you had to be just that sensitive and you had to be that secret. So they go down there in total secrecy, and I think there's been several authors that have written about some of the methods in which they got there and the secret names they used and so forth and so on. But when they came back, they did something very unique. They wrote up their notes and their drafts into what they thought was going to be the Federal Reserve Act as we know it today. But because of a change in the presidency and Taft went out and Wilson came in, Woodrow Wilson, there were some changes on the Hill for different reasons, and the act got modified that they had put forth. So still, when it was passed, the basic elements which would allow them to control the money system of America was still in there. So they got it passed, and then they placed two of the people that went to that secret meeting in charge of it. They named it the Federal Reserve Banking System, and they put Paul Walberg, who was at the meeting. He was from a wealthy family in Germany that was in the banking business, and his family had been trained in government bonds by the Rothschild family in England. So they became the number one, number two people in the Federal Reserve running at that time were two of the people that made the meeting, secret meeting. So now they controlled it. Well, what a lot of people don't understand is they can't seem to grasp, well, how can you make money from the Federal Reserve System, and why would you want to control it? Well, they set the system up in a very simplistic manner, really, when you stand back and look at it. All they did was they set up a system, originally 12 Federal Reserve banks, and they said, okay, we're going to put a Federal Reserve Bank in your part of the country. Now, you as bankers, talking about local bankers in that area, if you all want to participate, you can buy shares into it, and we, the citizens, we'll get the citizens of America to pay you 6% interest on your money, regardless of how the economy does. So they did. The local bankers went and bought in stock, and they if you want to know who owns the individual reserve banks, it is the local banks and the regional banks in that particular area. They're the ones that own the stock. But that's not where the ingenious part is. The ingenious part was they also put in there that whoever controlled the biggest banks and the biggest Federal Reserve System with the most assets pretty much became the talking voice of the whole system. Well, that was New York. That's the reason the New York Federal Reserve is the number one Federal Reserve Bank in the country. And that is also why you will see that most of the time the new chairman of the Federal Reserve will come from the New York Federal Reserve Bank. And they they set up such archaic control at that time. Let's say in 1913 when it was passed, if you own a set of banks, maybe you were from Rochester, New York, and you decided you wanted to open up a bank in Argentina, and you wanted to get some of the international business, you had to have the approval of the Federal Reserve Bank before you could open up any international banking system. This gave the big banks that were controlled by the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds the edge because they wouldn't allow it. So Citigroup and what is now J.P. Morgan Chase became the two top international lenders. Even as we speak today, they're two of the top three banks in the United States. So that gave them additional profits. And then with the system that they set up a system where we were on a cash basis, more or less, and they took that away and substituted it for government bonds with interest coupons. And instead of, just imagine, as an example, you had a bridge that needed to be built by the government, and it cost $1 million. And under the old system, we would have printed the $1 million, and we would have put it at the hands or in the hands of the people that would have bought the materials and paid for the labor, and the bridge would have been built, and that would have been the end of it. However, with this new system, what they did was that we can no longer do that. We had to get the money from the Federal Reserve, and in exchange, we would have to sign issue a government bond with interest coupons. Now, Thomas Edison and Henry Ford, a few years after the Federal Reserve was established, were both adamant opponents to the Federal Reserve because no one could explain to them why the American citizens would have to pay interest for the use of their own currency, and instead let private third-party bankers loan the citizens their own money and then charge them interest for it. And they were outraged about it. It's a great article that I put in my book from the New York Times discussing it. And Ford and Edison they said, we're going to come down here to Alabama and we're going to build a hydroelectric plant. It's going to cost the American citizens about $30 million. But the way they're going to pay for it by going through the Federal Reserve, it's going to wind up costing $60 million. And the people that never bought a single piece of material and never hired any of the labor or paid for any of the labor are going to make as much money out of this as the people that actually did the labor and the materials. So they were very upset about it, but what they didn't realize was that they had pretty much purchased, I think it was the top 25 newspapers in the country, and they had pretty much controlled the news that was going out to the general public. So with the exception of that one article that got printed in the New York Times, and it got printed because it was talking about the hydroelectric dam in Muscle Shoals, Alabama, and it wasn't talking about the Federal Reserve. You wouldn't get into that till several paragraphs. But outside of that, they pretty much control the news that people read and see and hear today. So there's really not a lot of ways to get the truth to the American people so we can solve the problem. But to go back to the ownership, the ingenious part of having the big banks in New York control the largest of the 12 Federal Reserve, which in therefore gave them the pretty much the control of the system, you got to take that up one more tier. If you say, okay, well, Citicorp and J.P. Morgan Chase were the big banks at that time that pretty much controlled through their subsidiaries and everything else the New York Federal Reserve. Well, then you've got to take it a notch up, and you say, well, who told them what to do? Who were the main families behind the banks that were behind the Federal Reserve? And that's where you get into wealthy families like the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds. And there is so much misinformation out there that it's hard to and some of it put out by the Federal Reserve themselves. But it's hard to understand unless you just stand back and look at it and you say, wow, I see what's going on here. And that, today, as we speak, the Federal Reserve System is still controlled the same way. And people need to know, Jake, that when you look at the congressional archives and you dig through a lot of this information, I would challenge the people to, if they're not going to read the book, to go to the congressional archives and pull up some exhibits that the government spent 6 months in researching back in 1913. And people have referred to it out in the industry as a Peugeot hearing, but it was about the money trust. And these charts have never been printed anywhere in any book that I've ever found. And I couldn't print them because they were too large, so I had to just name the names and deals. But basically what they did was they went in and they verified in 1913 that this group of individuals had already taken control over industries like U.S. Steel, AT&T, Armor, just a whole numerous, the railroads, the insurance companies, the banks. They had them all detailed and connected. And that was in 1913. So you have an option today. You can believe that they said, okay, well, they caught us, so we'll give everything back because we're nice people. Or they have multiplied their ownership tremendously. And some financial experts believe that the Rockefellers' collective net worth is somewhere around 11 trillion. Some people estimate the Rothschilds between 100 and 300 trillion. And that's the reason you very seldom see organizations such as theirs in the Forbes 500, or, they're not millionaires and billionaires, they're trillionaires.
Would you say it's an educated assumption that this system was never meant to last very long, that it was meant for these ruling families to gather as much assets as possible? Because from what I've read, the national debt grows approximately around $4 billion a day from what I remember.
That's correct.
So that's not a sustainable situation, and I mean these people obviously know that. So
yeah, and you're right, Jake. They originally the original Federal Reserve Act that was passed on December 23rd, 1913, was only for 20 years, and people have to understand is this would have been the third time that arrangements such as this had been instituted in America. The first two times, they lasted for 20 years each, and then, as they say on the street, they got busted out for fraud and corruption. So this time, the bankers and the families stayed in the background and allowed a document that all of Congress thought was originated by the 25 members that was put on the committee, but it wasn't. And it was originated by the people we talked about going to Jekyll Island. So they really assumed that they would get in, do their normal looting, pillaging, whatever they could get, like you say, for 20 years, and then we would realize what was going on, and we kick them out, or we change the system. Every country needs a national bank, but that didn't happen because of the way it was coming up for renewal in 1933, and they ran in 1928, and got it renewed before the stock market crash and before the Great Depression, because they knew that if they waited, they knew what was coming. And if they waited until one of those two events happened, there is no way that they would ever be able to renew it. So with those two events happening, it created a chaos in this country, and they were able to eventually get another document signed that says that the Federal Reserve System is going to remain into perpetuity until Congress decides otherwise. In other words, they don't have to come back and renew it anymore. And then you go through, since 1913, 4 generations, and you assume that whatever you see is what it is, and there's nothing else there, and everything's okay, and our national banking system is fine, and blah blah blah, and it's not. And if people don't take this seriously and they don't get involved, they're going to have some dire consequences coming up in the very near future.
Now the situation, I mean, it's piled up on top of each other, and we're in a situation now where, the dollar is fluctuating every day. You don't really know where the dollar stands. There's so much speculation. China is trying to take down the dollar as a reserve currency. China's devaluing their currency against the dollar. The Federal Reserve is supposed to be the referee. I mean, they were designated as the referee in this whole situation, but the referee plays for one of the teams and is not on our team.
That's correct.
So we're stuck in a fixed game where we really have no control over this system at all, and that's how they like it.
Yeah, you're right. The way the system is set up, there is the citizens of the United States, that's me, you, everyone else, has no authority whatsoever over that group of people. We have authority over the U.S. Treasury because we own it. We have authority over the Senate and the Congress. We own it. We elect the people. We decide. We allow them to decide for us, which I'm going to bring up to you in a minute. But basically, there is nothing. The Justice Department, the FBI, the presidency, nobody has control over these people, and they're totally independent, and they're totally private. And that's a hard thing to get your hands around. I mean, you have to ask yourself a question. In 1913, we had a free printing press. If we needed money, we printed it and we paid for our bills, and that was it. And let me tell you, the economy was booming at that time. We had less than 1% unemployment on 100 million people, and but they didn't want anybody having any say so about what they did and how they did it. And they convinced Congress that, and for whatever way they convinced them, that this was a good thing to be private and everything. But what they didn't do, Jake, is nowhere in the Federal Reserve Act, in the original Federal Reserve, does it disclose that they're going to charge the citizens of America interest for the use of their own money. It is not in there. Never has been put in there. But that's what the system is now. And that's where we're right at $18.4 trillion right now in national debt over the last 100 years. That's what they've done for us. So the value of the dollar, if they keep squeezing it for the half of 100 years, is now worth about 3 cents from what it was in 1913. We don't have very much longer to go. And if we don't stop them, if we don't nationalize the Fed and make it a branch of the U.S. government where it's now answerable to the people, then we're going to wind up driving the bus off the edge of the cliff, and every citizen in this country is going to be on it. And you're going to be looking at, we're going to lose the world reserve currency status. We're going to be looking at $10 for a gallon of gas. They're paying that in Europe right now because they're not the world reserve currency. And a lot of economic experts would agree with that statement. But they really don't care. I'm sure they've got a backup plan for what happens when America falters. But for the average person on the street, they don't understand what benefit it is to them to get involved. And here's the benefit. How many people have gone to Mexico, and in the days of old, I don't know about recently with all the drug wars, but in the days of old, you could take a small amount of American dollars and you could go to Mexico. You could have a very inexpensive vacation. You could buy goods and services down there 20 times what you could up here in America, because our dollar was much more valuable than their peso. Now, for the average person on the street to understand what I'm going to say is this. When we no longer have a national debt, the value of our dollar is going to go through the roof. We will be the only country in the world without a national debt. The value of our dollar will be so strong that anything else out there, gold, silver, platinum, diamonds, it doesn't make any difference, will pale in comparison. The wealth of America will be transferred back to its citizens, and that's what the elitist doesn't want to have happen. What is the old saying that Hitler used during the World War II? The more for the many is the less for the few. So if America has its wealth back, the elitists have they're not elitists anymore. And that's what they've been fighting for 200 years, the last 100 years here through the Federal Reserve. And if an average person in America is if they're making $1,000 a month right now, and they can't survive on that because it takes more dollars to buy the same goods that it did a year or two ago. And it's been that way for the last 100 years. The value keeps going down to the dollar, therefore it takes more dollars to purchase the goods and services. But if you pay off the national debt and strengthen the currency, then all of a sudden that same $1,000 is going to have the purchasing power of 15 to 20 times what it has today. And that won't make any difference whether you're a factory worker or a millionaire. If you're an American citizen, that value is going to go up through the roof for all of us. And you would probably, right now, the census has over 50 million people listed in poverty status in America. And it's not because of the amount of money they're getting. It's just that what they get just doesn't go far enough anymore. But if that reverses, if they had the purchasing power of $15,000 today per month, what do you think would happen? They would come up out of poverty. This country would see a boom like it's never seen before, and that's what Edison and Ford said back in 1917, I think it was, when they made that statement. But the elitists have so much power, politically wise. The only way we can solve it is through the people, and there's a way to do that. And we may get to that a little bit later on, but the average person just needs to know what a great benefit it's going to be for us as American citizens if we pay our national debt off. And it's happened before. Happened back during Andrew Jackson's days.
Well, right now, I mean, as you were saying earlier, our monetary policy isn't good for the guy on the street at all. I mean, he could wake up in the morning. I mean, he owns a business. He could wake up in the morning and his price, his price for of goods is completely different than it was the day before. This whole situation is really only good for speculators.
That's true.
And what you were talking about with regards to nationalizing the Fed, I agree with. I agree with nationalizing the Fed. Just completely scrapping the Fed and giving, all the power to the Congress. I mean, do we really want those crazy people controlling our monetary policy?
Well, I know it's a scary thought. It's like you jump from the frying pan into the fire, but it's really not, because here's why. We do have control over the congressman. We can elect or de-elect them. The bank, the Federal Reserve Bank, we have no control over, none whatsoever. And I'm gonna bet this. There are a lot of I've read I don't know how many books during the course of research the last 4.5 years, but several people, prominent people, have said, no, we need to end the Fed. We just need to walk in, cut the lights off, shut it down, and that's it. Well, you can't do that. The Fed has 20,000 employees that are American citizens that come every day. They work hard. They do a good job running their little segment of whatever it is that runs our nation's banking system. And you just can't go in there and shut the lights off and fire everybody. You can't do that. It's not logical, and it's not intelligent. But you can accomplish the same thing just by nationalizing them and making them a branch of the U.S. government. Now, these people, yes, they're on the government payroll, but they're on the government payroll anyway. They're just taking it through the Fed. So nothing's going to change except there won't be any more of this, it won't be interest being charged to us for the use of our own currency. The paper money will be in the same position as the coin money, and there won't be an interest. When you stop paying interest on top of interest, and you start we take in about $3 trillion a year in this country to pay on the bills, and that comes from 80% from individual taxes and 20% from corporate taxes. But once that money comes in, that is the only money that can be paid on the national debt that doesn't come through the Fed. And that's what a lot of people don't understand. If we need $4 trillion to run this country and we're only paying $3 in, that means Fed's going to have to loan another $1 trillion to the government and charge them interest for it, which is our money, to run the country. It's an impossible system to pay off. But because our economy has been so great, this country has been so resilient for the last 100 years, that we have held off that pending doom date for a long time. And until the debt got up to a point where it's unmanageable now. There's nothing they can do to except to cut out the people's program, take the money from the people. But outside of that, there's nothing they can really do to change the economy unless they nationalize the Fed. That is the only solution.
What would it look like if we nationalized the Fed economically in this country? I mean, we would go back to, a credit system like we used to have?
Well, yeah, what would basically happen would be this. The main thing in running the nation's affairs is that the citizens of this country shouldn't be paying interest for the use of their own money. Imagine how insane that sounds. And this is what Edison Ford said. Their article that they say gave the New York Times is great. But today, if you translate it in today's time, imagine the American citizens paying China or Hong Kong or England or Canada or any other country interest for the use of our own money. That's crazy. And they don't want to talk about it in that fashion, but that's what we're doing. And under the old system, like I said before, if the government needed money to pay its bills, it printed it. It was direct between the citizens and their government, and they owned it. We own it. We own every paperclip in Washington. That money comes directly out of the Treasury and goes directly to the source that it was intended to. It doesn't go through a private third party where they charge us interest for the use of our own currency. And if you get rid of that, Jay, if you get rid of that one aspect of it, then all of a sudden you've got $3 trillion a year coming in, and your national debt, instead of growing, starts coming down because you're not paying interest on interest. And that's a system that they have right now. If we need $1 trillion to pay interest, they'll just print up another government bond and pay the interest. But the problem is, government bond they produce also has interest coupons on them. So now you wind up paying the second set of bonds, and if that doesn't get paid, the third set of bonds, and so forth and so on. And you can eliminate all of that if you nationalize the Fed. And the good thing about it is we already have the employees in place. And if you do away with the open market committee and things like that of the Fed and put it back in the hands of the U.S. Treasury, these people are accountable. You can hold them accountable. You can charge them with crimes if they don't act accordingly and represent the people. But you can't do that now.
Andrew Jackson gets a bad rap, and rightfully so, for the smallpox blankets against the indigenous people of the United States. But
yeah,
he fought against this very thing happening in our country, and he was successful. So I mean, credit to him for that, for sure, because he was impeached and he fought that off, and he put himself out there for America for this type of thing to not occur. But I mean, unfortunately, it did end up occurring. What do you see in the inevitability of a default of Treasury bonds? I mean, mathematically, it will end up happening. I mean, the interest on the debt will just be too much at some point. What do you see? How do you see that situation playing out?
Okay, well, the bottom of the base of the pyramid is the 321 million Americans. If you go up to the next level of pyramids, we elect in this country a total of 535 people to represent us, and so now those 535 represent the 321 million, right? Now, go up another level on the pyramid and put the number 44. That's the number of total committees that both the House of Representatives and the United States Senate has. Each one of those committees has a chairperson, thus 44 individuals. So now you've got 44 individuals controlling the lives of 321 million Americans. And if you go to the very top of the pyramid, you have to put a question mark because you don't know the number of people, but it's going to be very small. This represents the elitists that control the corporations, that control the lobbyists, that influence the politicians, and that's how they do business. So in the end, you've got, even of those 44 members, you may only have 18 to 20 that represent the primary committees, the Armed Services Committee, the Agriculture, the Banking, Insurance, the lobbyists, and so forth. So if you're the wealthy elite, you don't really have to control a whole lot of people. And if you look at the net worths of the people that are in those positions, you kind of have to wonder. You certainly can deduct that they're not going to have to worry about retirement. So that can change, I believe, with the nationalization of the Fed. And there's no, to me, from 4.5 years worth of research, Jay, I can't find any other way to solve the nation's problem right now. There's just not. If you do not attack the core problem, which is the rising national debt, we have no shot at keeping this country. And I think that's the reason you see a lot of economic experts wanting to sell gold and silver and switch over, to paper money. I mean, from paper money to that, and do one thing and another. But a lot of people don't realize this, and I'll just say this real quick. Since the year after the World War I, the Rothschild family in London, England, decided and took upon themselves to be the entity to set the price of gold worldwide. And it is pretty much the same way today. And no one can or will object to it. So what does that tell you about how powerful that family is? I mean, can you imagine that? You're going to come out and tell the rest of the world, I'm going to set the price of gold. And that's it. There's no discussion. And there you have. And that scares, that ought to scare a lot of people.
No, hello?
Yes.
Okay. We had some interference there. But it seems that they compartmentalize the Federal Reserve. They take the New York Fed and they centralize the power base there, while, putting out the rules that, the most powerful Fed gets the most voice within the group or whatever, but it's always going to be New York. And so,
always.
So they stack the deck for New York, and they control it. They control it through there. So they control everything through that system.
Yeah, and if you, like I had spoken earlier about, if you want to set up an international bank system in Argentina or somewhere else, you can't do it without the permission of the Fed. But here's the other thing. They determine which banks and investment houses get to sell the government bonds that they are forcing on to the American people. In other words, if you and I owned a company and we had a good record and we had great credentials and sufficient assets, and we went to the Fed and say, look, we want to sell U.S. government treasury bonds, and here's all our information, you're not going to get approved. They're only going to approve those to which they are instructed to approve, and that's the big banks.
Yeah,
and Goldman Sachs.
Yeah, Goldman Sachs seems to have snuck their way into the power structure. They weren't a part of the original.
No, but I'll tell you what I have discovered about them is, and I read this in a journal of one of the employees of Rothschild in England, was that he was so excited that when he first got approval for, got hired by the Rothschild family, and he was all set to go to work for them. He knew what their promise was and so forth and so on. But they sent him to train at Goldman Sachs for the first year. They wanted him to learn how to handle treasury bonds, government treasury bonds, and that told me volumes of information. You don't send a future employee to a competitor to train him. You may send him to a branch of yours to train him, so to prepare him for the big show, so to speak. So that told me volumes about Goldman Sachs.
Yeah, that just told me volumes about Goldman Sachs. So Jerry, do you have any last words? Do you have any projects you're working on? Any website you want people to check out? You got the floor.
Yeah, okay. Well, yeah, I appreciate that, Jay, and it's been a pleasure speaking with you and trying to get this information out to the people. I wish that people, there's so many things that was in the book that, of course, you can't cover in an hour. But I wrote the book. It took me 4.5 years. I put 245 pictures in it so that the common person could understand where we're at today, where we were and where we're at, where we should be. And they can buy the book at, they can go to Barnes & Noble or Amazon, order it online, get the hardback version because it's got charts in it that It's not been published anywhere in America at any time. And you're going to get some information and that is going to really prepare you to do the right thing. And if anybody is listening to my voice, if you don't get the book, and you should to go off of this information alone, then send your email to every House representative and senator in your state, and tell them you want to nationalize the Fed. Period. You don't have to say anything else. But if you get if you order the book, you'll be amazed at what you find. And like I say, there's information in there that is not available anywhere else in any other book.
All right. Well, thank you, Jerry Hollingsworth. Love to have you back on again in the future. And
anytime. Jay.
Everyone, go out and buy Jerry's book. It's at cphbooks.org. So go check out Jerry's books and buy them. He's a very good writer. Thank you again, Jerry.
Thank you, sir. Goodbye.
So that was Jerry Hollingsworth. Great talk about the Fed. We had some technical difficulties, of course, as you heard, but we're gonna get out of here right now, and we're gonna take a break, and we are gonna come back with Mr. Wayne Madsen for our weekly segment, The Week